Hello and welcome to another edition of English Vocabulary Matters, Vocabulary in the News. Today we're going to be looking at a news article and having a look at some of the more interesting words and phrases along the way. So the title of this article is Trump's Trade War with Neighbors is Delayed. After months of fiery rhetoric and threats, Donald Trump's much anticipated trade war with neighboring countries has been put on ice. So if we look at the first phrase here, rhetoric is essentially a word we use to describe very persuasive, creative, colorful language, skillful use of language, often used to persuade people of a particular course of action. So of course politicians are renowned for their rhetoric. It can be viewed both positively and negatively, because quite often if we talk of rhetoric, what we are referring to is empty words. In this case, we use rhetoric with the adjective fiery. So this is obviously connected with the noun fire. Fire is hot, so that implies that the words used here, the rhetoric used, is heated, perhaps emotional and maybe even angry. So the implication is that there has been a lot of heated debate around this topic, and there have been a lot of threats. So that brings us on to the second word here. When you make a threat, or if you use the verb to threaten somebody, you are saying that if people don't do what you want, there will be a negative consequence. Or perhaps if people continue doing something that you don't like, there will be a negative consequence. And in this case, Donald Trump has threatened repeatedly to impose high taxes or tariffs on imports coming from neighboring countries. In fact, the article here refers to this trade war, this anticipated trade war, as being put on ice. Now, just as you might put something in the freezer or the fridge in order to keep it fresh for a long time, this metaphor is saying that you are essentially delaying something. So you are waiting a period of time before taking action or before dealing with it. Moving on to the second paragraph now. So behind closed doors, intense negotiations have reshaped the battleground, with each side securing concessions to avoid the economic fallout of escalating tariffs. So this expression, behind closed doors, refers to the fact that these negotiations have been happening in secret, out of the public view. So just like in your home, you close the door so that people will respect your privacy. Strangers cannot come into your home and nobody can see what's going on. In this metaphor too, we are keeping the negotiations private. Then we move on to the next word, which is fallout. So as a noun, fallout originally referred to the highly radioactive material, the debris and dust and other things that were ejected into the air after a nuclear explosion and then gradually fell out of the atmosphere onto the ground. And this fallout, radioactive fallout, was highly dangerous. And the metaphor here is referring to that, because just as fallout is a negative consequence of a nuclear explosion, when we talk of a fallout from a bad situation or something that has happened, we are equally talking about a negative consequence. So the fallout of increasing tariffs or taxes on imports could be that demand decreases, and that would have a knock-on effect on other areas of the economy, such as employment. So the last word we have highlighted is tariffs. And as I mentioned before, this is a form of taxation. A tariff specifically is a taxation on imports. So if you increase tariffs, maybe you're trying to protect domestic production from cheaper foreign imports. However, in this case, Donald Trump is using the threat of increased tariffs more as a bargaining chip to get what he wants. So really the rationale behind it is more political rather than economic. And in fact, as we mentioned before, the economic fallout could be very negative for the US economy as well as other economies around the world. Moving on to the next paragraph. For the United States, the delay buys valuable time to recalibrate its trade strategy without immediate retaliatory measures. Trump's administration can now claim a diplomatic victory, having extracted promises for fairer trade practices. So the first word is a noun and a verb. To delay, or in this case the noun, the delay, refers to when you are essentially putting off or postponing something. In this case, they are postponing the imposition of the taxes. The threat of the taxes, it seems, has been enough to gain some concessions from other countries. So for now, they are not being imposed. The second word, promise. Well, when you promise to do something, that means that you are going to do it at some future point in time. Of course, you can promise not to do something as well. In this case, it seems that the countries, specifically Mexico and Canada, have promised that in the future they are going to try to impose stricter controls on their borders to stop illegal immigrants crossing into the United States, and also to try to crack down on or become stricter on the illegal importation of dangerous drugs such as fentanyl. Moving on to the next paragraph. However, critics argue that the tough talk has yielded only modest gains, with potential long-term damage to international relations simmering beneath the surface. So the first word here, tough, is essentially a synonym of difficult or hard, depending on how you use it. In this case, it's used figuratively, so if you're talking tough, that means you are using harsh, threatening language, not being willing to compromise. In this case, it says that despite the tough talk, there have only been modest gains. And of course, the negative consequences or long-term damage to international relations are simmering beneath the surface. So that means that they are still there, perhaps slightly hidden, not obvious, but there's still a lot of potential for a big explosion at a later date. Simmering is actually something that we do when we're cooking. It refers to when a liquid like water has reached boiling point and you turn down the heat a little bit and it keeps bubbling away but at a lower intensity. It's usually used in reference to negative feelings such as hatred. Moving on to the next paragraph. Meanwhile, America's neighbors, caught in the crossfire, have managed to sidestep the worst-case scenarios. Countries like Mexico and Canada secured temporary relief from punitive tariffs, all while reinforcing their own economic alliances to reduce dependency on the US market. So the first word here we have is sidestep. This is a verb, a regular verb, and you can kind of imagine what it means if you analyze the two words that it's made of. So if you step to the side, you are moving yourself in a lateral direction. So you might do this if you're trying to avoid an obstacle. Perhaps you're walking along a path and you see something blocking your way, so you step to the side and go around it. And in this way, when you sidestep something, you are avoiding it. In this case, the countries of Mexico and Canada seem to have sidestepped or avoided the worst case scenario. So if they hadn't reached an agreement, it's possible that the consequences would be much worse for them. Punitive, the second word here. Well, this is used as an adjective. When something is punitive, it's related to punishment. And we punish people when they do something wrong. So in this case, the idea is that tariffs or taxes are being used by Donald Trump as a way of punishing those countries for not doing what he wants them to do. At the same time, the reality of the prospect of tariffs has forced those other countries to look at reducing their dependency on the US market. So when you're dependent on something, that means it is very necessary for you. You can be dependent on other people for assistance or help. You can also be dependent on drugs. If you are addicted to drugs, you become dependent on them. You need them in order to function in a normal way. In this case, the other countries of Canada and Mexico are trying to lessen how their economies are connected to the US market, so they're not dependent on the US for economic growth. Perhaps they will look to other markets such as Europe or China or Asian countries in order to increase the trade with those countries and thereby lessen the future prospect of negative consequences of a trade war with the US. So that's all for today. Listen out for more videos about news articles in the future. Till next time, I'll say goodbye.